Hi everyone, my name is Mark Moikins from Big Mountain Studio, and we are continuing this Itinerary app series, and in this video we're going to talk about how to design your apps. So do you have a tough time figuring out how your screens will look in your app? Or do you wonder where to begin when it comes to designing the screens for your app? If yes, then keep watching, because in this video I'll be sharing tips, strategies, and free tools that you can use to start designing your apps today. As a developer, I understand that you may have a tough time designing your UI screens. So this video is specifically created to help you get started without overwhelming you with tons of information. So let's get started. In this video, I have another one thing to remember for designing, and that is always start simple. Always start simple and add just enough design until you get what you want. I'll give you an example. Now I searched and searched and could not find a definitive way to teach you guys the exact process of designing your UI. You know, a step-by-step method that wasn't overly complex. I don't like complex processes. I like simple processes. So I'm going to teach you my super simple process. And it basically works like this. Start simple and then refine. Refine means to improve something with small changes. Super simple, right? The more and more I thought about this, the more I realized that this is almost a basic truth in any activity. This process can be applied to any activity in life. It's just you start simple and then you refine it. Let's look at an example as it concerns mobile design. First, we start with what's called a wireframe mockup. It's just a bunch of lines, right? Basically, it's just blocks and shapes that show placement of UI objects on the screen. From there, we can add some color and choose a font. Then we can design it in Xcode and run it and see how it looks in the simulator. We started simple and we refined our design until we got what we wanted. Now in this example, you only see 3 steps of refining. You have the wireframe, the colors, the font, and then you built it and display it in a simulator. But you may have more steps or less steps if you already know what the user wants. The idea of simple will be different for many of you. So start at a point that you think is simple and then go from there. Okay, let's look at this first step of wireframing a bit more. As you try to figure out what your screen will look like, you can start with basic shapes. And this is just to get an idea of where things will be placed. This helps you figure out the composition of your user interface, and this is a great place to start if you have no idea where to start from. Just put some shapes together on the screen and move them around. You can do this in a program or do it on paper. For a program, I recommend using something free to begin with, because ultimately, you want money that you make from your app to pay for your expenses, right? So if your app isn't making any money right now, then save yourself some money and start free. So I recommend using Keynote for this. We'll do a demo later, and I'll show you how to use Keynote. If you want to do it on paper, you can actually download some mobile templates to print out and then draw on the paper itself. There's a website called sneakpeekit.com that is good for this, and we'll look into that later too. So that's the simplest I can think of when starting out. If you work for a company, then maybe you can ask them if they have a license to a design app that you can use. Let's talk about some of the advantages of wireframing. When you have no idea where to begin or have no design experience at all, this is absolutely a great place to start. It will give you a better idea of how your app will work too. It's also a great place to start if you want to hand off your idea to a professional designer, because this is a great place for them to start, and this will greatly assist them in producing something nice for you. Now another advantage is if you are creating apps for clients, because this way it shows them that this is a mock-up. Sometimes clients see a nice polished prototype and they get it in their heads that the app is almost complete. This has happened to me before, and it can confuse the clients when they see a nice beautiful prototype. A wireframe tells them that no, this app is not almost finished, and it is still in the beginning stages of being developed. Okay, so once you like the layout that you have, or you have a layout that has been approved by your customer or your client, you may want to work on finding the right colors and fonts as your next step. Colors and fonts will be in the next video, so we won't get into it in this video. I want to show you some tips in getting started with wireframing and designing in Keynote, but first I feel there's one more thing I need to share with you before we begin, and that is on the subject of communication. So what does communication have to do with designing your app anyway? Well, think about it like this. Each screen in your app is a communication to the user. And what does communication start with? before someone communicates to another what occurred before the actual words. Take a really close look at what is happening when you actually talk to someone. You're so good at forming this one thing, it happens super fast. Before you speak words, you have what's called an intention. It's an idea of what you're going to say first. You could call it a thought, but thoughts are a little bit different than intentions. So let's talk about this word intention. Intention is having an idea of what you want to say or do. It is a plan or purpose or objective that you want to achieve. You have intention first, and then your communication is second. Well, guess what? Your app has intention, and your screens have intentions. Google has done a lot of research in this area. They found if screens don't clearly communicate their intention, then the user experience worsens to a degree, and users find your app more difficult or less intuitive to use. So here's a tip. Google found that it's best if your intention is obvious and direct. So don't ask your users to try to do something. They downloaded your app for a reason. Show them or tell them how to do something. I mentioned your app and your screens have intentions, right? So let's talk about that. Apps communicate to a general or specific audience, or what you might call a market. A market is a general group of people that have something in common. It could be an age range that they have in common, or a country that they have in common, or an interest that they have in common. Don't overthink this, but just keep it in mind, because this will help you design your app for your market. Your market can be very specific or very general. Think about Apple's default apps on their mobile devices. What market are they for? Well, that's probably the most general market. Their apps probably say, I am for humans. So their apps are for everyone, for every market, for everyone that uses their phone, right? The main idea is that the intention will be your guide to how to further refine your design over time. Okay, good. Now that you get the idea that your app communicates an overall intention and your screens in your app communicate an intention, let's look at our task list and then go into Keynote and get busy wireframing. All right, I'm inside of Bitbucket, and as you can see, we have the repository that we created in previous videos. So I'm going to click on our app, and then I'm going to go down to Boards. And remember, this Trello board is what kind of keeps all my tasks together. So we see in things to do this week, we have a task to prototype the trip screen. And that's our first screen that we need to prototype. So this is the task that we're going to work on. Now, I mentioned that we can do wireframing inside of Keynote, so we're going to use that app to do this wireframing task. Okay, so I've opened up Keynote. This is usually the first screen that you see when you open up Keynote. It wants you to choose a template. I just choose the white one because it has no colors, it's very basic, and it's perfect for what we need it for. So double click on that. I can delete these things. And now, you notice that the size of the slide doesn't really represent an iPhone very well. So that's the first thing I'm going to change is the default size of the slide so it better matches the iPhone. And you can do that by clicking on the document button up here and then go to the slide size. If you expand that, there's a custom slide size option. Choose that. Now at this point, you might be asking yourself, well, what size should I use? Well, of course, you want to use the size of an iPhone. So here's a little tip on getting the width and height. Go into Xcode, and then just go to any view that you have, and choose the size of the phone that you want. For our purposes, I'm just going to stick with an iPhone 8. But you can go with a smaller size like an SE or even an iPhone X if you want. And then go to the size inspector over here, and then look at the width and height right here. So for the iPhone 8, we have 375 by 667. So those are the dimensions that I'm going to use. All right, there we go. So there is the size of our iPhone. And then from here, every time I add a new slide, you notice all the sizes are the size of an iPhone. So I could just go with the default one and then delete this information and then create my new mockup. Now previously we talked about intention, right? We need an intention for our app and an intention for our screens. So what you can do say for your app, you can just write your intention right on the first screen. This won't be part of your mockup, but keep it simple. The intention is what communicates to our market. And the market for a traveling app might be a market who, of course, travels, right? So it might not be someone who's like a teenager because they're still in school and they might not be traveling so much. But the market is pretty open. So anyone between 18 and maybe 75. And of course, we can always do more research and find out which age group travels the most. And we can create a UI for our app that communicates best to that age group. So for now, I'm just going to create an app intention for a traveling app or an itinerary app. And that's pretty much it. The app intention is to assist people who enjoy traveling. So all of our design for the UI for our app should contribute to this app intention. Everything we design and add and all the features that we add should be assisting people who enjoy traveling. And for our first screen, this will be where they can add trips, right? So we want to add an intention for this screen. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here and I want to show the presenter notes down below. So here, this is where I'm going to add this screen intention. And the intention here is basically to help someone easily add trips. And that's it. Pretty simple, right? Don't overcomplicate it. Don't write long sentences. Just keep it simple. So now we want to design a screen that helps people easily add trips. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to add my first shape by clicking on this shape button right here. And then I'm going to add a square. And this will represent a row in a table view. Now, I don't want any colors. I just want black and white. So what I'm going to do is click on this format button over here. And I'm going to change the color to white. But I do want a border, so I'm going to pick this border right here. And as you can see here, these are pre-made shape styles that I can click on to change the style of this shape. Well, there isn't one that's white with a black border, so I'm going to add one by clicking. Okay, then I'll just copy and paste this to represent a few different rows, like that. So these represent existing trips. And then I need to design a way for them to easily add trips, right? So I haven't done that yet. So I'm going to add a circle, and this will kind of represent a floating action button. And that's an Android style material design guideline that they have. They have these floating action buttons, which I like. So let's change that style back to white with just a black border. And there's pretty much my screen right there. Now, if I show this to some other people, they might not know what this circle means. So this is very simple, but it doesn't communicate enough for someone to understand what's happening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a plus button to it. Now that's really small right there. So I can hold down Command plus to increase the size. I can also come to this text tab right here and increase the size right here. And maybe we don't really want bold, so I'm just going to change that back to regular. Yeah, that looks better. It needs to be a little bit larger, right? So let's stick that in there. Let's try to center it a little bit. And what I'll do is I'm just going to group these two things together so I can move them around as one unit. There we go. Now it's just one shape. All right, good. So that's actually my first wireframe. It's simple. It's enough to get the idea across of what the screen will look like. And I can show it to other people and they'll get an idea of what it looks like too. This wireframe is also good. So if I wanted to take this and give it to a designer, he has enough idea to work with, but enough freedom to be creative with as well. But what I want to do is I want to add maybe 2 or 3 options to show people so they can look at it and say, yes, I like that one. No, I don't like this. So let's add another option. I'm just going to come here and select this slide and copy and paste it. And the screen intention, of course, is the same. Except now what I think I'll do is I have this other idea where we can add the plus button like right inside the last cell. So for example, when you first come into the screen, it'll look more like this. And we can have text on here later. But the idea is they come in, they see this cell, and it's basically click here to add a new trip. Okay, that's one idea. And so when they click on it, this cell will always exist on the bottom. For example, if I just make another copy here, let's see, I can just copy and paste this a few times. Whoops. So it's on a different layer. If you need to move it up, right click it, and then there's this, right here, bring to front. Right there, puts it on the front. Okay, so basically it'll look like this. And then I have one other idea. So let me copy and paste this again. And this will be the more traditional sense where there's a bar at the top, like a title bar or navigation bar, and then there's a button with a plus. So what I'll do is I'll just ungroup this. I'm going to reuse this plus here. Delete that. And let me just reuse this square since we have it here. This will be kind of like my nav bar, I guess. Like that. We'll have our plus. I'm just using the arrow keys to kind of reposition it. And usually with the title bar, there's some text at the top, so I don't really know what I'm going to put up there right now, but I'll just put some X's to kind of represent the title. That looks a little big, huh? So I'm going to hit Command minus and make that smaller until it looks halfway decent. Yeah, that looks right. And we'll just move these up. All right, there we go. So as you can see, we have a few different options here that we can present to someone. And of course, you know, down here it says easily add trips. So another idea is to prompt someone or have like a screen that first shows up when they start the app that tells them what to do. So let's design that real quick. Maybe we'll start with this screen right here. And then I'll copy and paste that. And then here, there won't be any cells added because this is the first time they come into the screen. And maybe what I'll do is just do something like this. We'll add a square. And we'll have it fill up everything. I want it toward the back, so I'm going to say send it back so this button shows right here. And let's change the color. Go to style, maybe make it like a light gray. And then we'll have some text that says, yeah, click the plus button to add a new trip. Maybe make this a little bit bigger. Okay, now notice right now, I'm not really worrying about the font. I don't really care about that. So when they come into this screen, they can't really do anything except for click on this plus button. And then once they click on this plus button, then it'll transfer to a new screen that kind of looks like, well, I guess it'll just look like this. But then they'll have another screen that allows them to enter a new trip. You know, as you can guess, we're kind of like getting ahead of ourselves. This might be a different task. So, which I think we are getting too far ahead of ourselves. This is a great idea, but it's not really the task that we're working on right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep it here, but I'm not going to present it to my users just now. Instead, what I'll do is I'll go back into Bitbucket and I'll create another card for it. And we'll call it an onboarding screen for the trip screen. Okay, so I'll hit enter to add that. And this might not even be in version 1. Maybe, you know, when thinking about our minimum viable product, maybe we don't want an onboarding screen in version 1 because we don't need it or want it. So it'll be something we have to decide on. I can either drag it over here and put it into version 2, or I can put it into version 1 and we'll reevaluate it at a later time. So what I think I'll do is I'll just put it in version 2 for now. And if we decide later that we do want this, then I'll drag it back over into version 1 and we'll pick a different week to create that onboarding screen. Okay, good. So I think we have our prototype screen done. So let's drag that over here. And then my next task is actually to present this prototype to my patrons on my Patreon site. And we'll talk about that later as far as like what's going to happen as a next step. Okay, and for the screen to show the trips, we're not going to do that this week. So I'll just move that back over into version 1. Okay, now earlier I mentioned wireframing on paper. Paper is great because it's a super fast way to get down your ideas. I find that paper allows you to get down a bunch of ideas in a short amount of time without having to worry about getting things perfect. You're just drawing freehand. So one of the tools that can assist you in doing this is you can download these templates from sneakpeekit.com. So let's take a look at that website. Okay, so we're on sneakpeekit.com, and if you just scroll down, you can see different options for grids that they give you. You just have like a regular grid, you have a web browser grid. Keep scrolling down until you reach mobile phones. So here's 2 mobile phones that are like super long. If you have a really long screen, you have different things going on, you know, like a scrolling screen, right? 4 up mobiles. Basically, it's a PDF that has 4 different screens on it. That might be good to start with. So we can just download that. Okay, it downloads a zip file. We can open that. And then we have a couple of PDFs. We have one with a grid and one without a grid. The grid is just the little dots here, right? So let's look at the one with the grid. Okay, so as you can see, we have a PDF that has what looks like a maybe iPhone 8 Plus size on it. But you see, it gives you something that you can print out that gives you a blank template for your phones that you can quickly and easily draw options on there. So if you're at work and you want to show someone real quick, or you want to show family members or people around you and kind of get ideas, paper is a great way to generate ideas super fast because you're drawing it, you're not trying to align things and get things perfect. It gives you an idea of how to get a screen together really fast. So this is definitely another viable option that I recommend. All right, great. We've got some ideas now, and we've created some wireframes for our first screen. Now what do we do? Well, if you're working with a client, then you want to include them early in the process and get some feedback from them. Give them some options and then have them choose one. If you're building an app for yourself, then you want to include people around you. Try to find people that are in the market that your app is for. You know, if your app is for gamers, then try to find a bunch of gamers and show them your ideas. The main thing is you want to get feedback. So for this app, I'll be sharing it with my patrons on patreon.com. And as you can see, there's a link down below. So if you want to go there too, you can take a look at these prototypes and you can vote on them. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a poll, and then they can pick the one that they like the most. I'll review the feedback and then I'll make a decision. This feedback should help guide you during the app building process, but be willing to change it at any point too. Because remember, we're starting simple and then we'll be refining later on. And before I end this video, let's just go over that one thing one more time. Always start simple. Then add just enough design until you get what you want. Now, how simple you want to start is really up to you. And here's another tip. If you find yourself adding more and more design, and then you hit a wall, you hit this roadblock, and you can't figure out how to move forward, then the answer might actually be to move backwards. Sometimes you can add too much design, and then you start getting into this complex mess, and you don't really know how to proceed. So go back to a more simpler screen. Start removing design and simplify your screen. Maybe you need 2 separate, simpler screens instead of one overly complex screen. So keep that in mind. If you run into a wall, move backwards. Go back to more simple. All right, great. We're on the path to developing our app. In this video, you learned about how to start designing your app with my super simple process of starting simple and then refining your design so it gets better and better. Looked at a couple of free tools that you can start using today. There are many great tools out on the market today. So do your research and do some exploring and find one that works great for you. Maybe you want to stick with Keynote. That's totally fine. We also looked at this idea of intention and how it serves as a starting point for your super simple design. The intention of your app and the intention of the screen should drive your design. Because remember, the intention is what starts the communication. All right, thanks guys for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and share this video to spread this information and help your fellow developers. If you know another language and you want to help me, you can click on the 3 dots below the video next to the share button and add a translation for the title and the description of this video. And this will help people who speak your native language also find the video. All right, thanks guys.